welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Michael Brodkorb.
And I'm Becky Scherr.
We've spent a few episodes recently focusing on Minnesota politics, and in this week we're hitting the presidential campaign with a local angle. We're joined today by Kelly Fenton and Andy Brehm. Kelly has previously joined our podcast last year for a panel discussion following our interview with Scott Jensen. Kelly served in the state legislature and is the former deputy chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota. Andy is joining us for the first time on the podcast this week. Andy served as Senator Norm Coleman's press secretary and has been a vocal Republican in Minnesota over the years. In his X/Twitter bio, Andy bills himself as, quote, a lonely conservative voice in the sea of blue that is St. Paul. With our guests, we're going to break down the recent endorsement of former President Donald Trump by Minnesota's Republican Congressional Delegation. We will break down why Congressman Emmer, Stauber, and Finstead, along with Congresswoman Fischbach, all chose to support Trump. We'll discuss why they announced together and why now. We'll also break down our thoughts on what this means for them politically in Washington and back here in Minnesota. We'll have an exciting update about the standings and the winner in the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky's Pick'em League for fantasy football. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Today we are joined by Andy Brehm and Representative Kelly Fenton, and we are going to talk all things Congressional Delegation endorsement of Donald Trump. So, as you all know, recently Congressman Tom Emmer, Pete Stauber, Brad Finstead, along with Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach, endorsed former President Donald Trump. Andy, in a recent Star Tribune LTE, you said, quote, it's disappointing to see Minnesota's Republican Congressional Delegation recklessly endorse Donald Trump for president. I'd like you to kick us off and tell us why you think that. Why are you disappointed, and why do you think it was a reckless choice?
Well, first of all, guys, thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. I'm a big fan, and I was disappointed for a few reasons. One is we have these things called presidential primaries, so that Republicans get to decide who we want as our candidate. And I think an endorsement this early is inappropriate. We've got quite a few good folks running, and we should leave it to Republicans to make that decision, not elected officials. But, more importantly, I think just the unfitness of Donald Trump, his just absolutely erratic behavior and unfitness for office, I think to see such a strong endorsement for him at this stage in the race just being so inappropriate from a substantive level, and not to mention a political level. I mean, Donald Trump does not work in the state of Minnesota. I think we can credit him for the dominance that the DFL has in the state, for the decline of the state. We can credit Trumpism for that. So I just thought it was bad all around.
And Kelly, we'll come back to your comments on the political ramifications, positive or negative, on this, but want to get your initial take on this. Were you disappointed, surprised, impressed? What was your initial take?
I think I was indifferent. I was a little bit surprised, but also I looked at it then at a 30,000 foot look. My first thought was Emmer was the last holdout out of the congressional leadership to come out and endorse Trump. And I think there's a real push right now within Congress to show that we are unified. And I think it was important for them to stand in unity for whatever reason. But also, I think as a leader, you need to get behind the people within your own area and district and support a decision they're making. And again, they all stood together as well. I've always said, as having been a state representative, that we need to legislate our districts. And that means that you're not going to like every vote that we take. And I think what was happening here as well was, same kind of idea, but they were standing in support of how their districts actually voted. Trump actually got more votes in 2020 than 2016, and predominantly within CD1, CD6, CD7, CD8. And so there's something to be said about that as well.
Michael,
And full disclosure, I think I stated that when I initially put my thoughts out there, is that I'm not on the Trump bandwagon. He's not my pick. He won't be my pick. But I'm just looking at it without that knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people out there were having at the time.
Michael, what's your take on the timing of this? Again, being, before Super Tuesday, Andy said, far too early for these type of endorsements. What's your take on the timing and the overall move for these members to endorse former president?
I was surprised in terms of the fact that they all did it at once. The timing of it is also, it's a bit surprising. I've long held the position that this was Donald Trump's nomination from the get-go. And I've long been a critic of Donald Trump. Prior to running this time, I didn't vote for him in 16 or 20. And so I wasn't a fan of his then, and I'm not a fan now. And so I understand from a process standpoint, Kelly's arguments. I identify more with what Andy said. And I identify more with kind of that fervor and that disagreement. I'm concerned about the kind of the effect that Trump will have on the rest of the ticket, as I've articulated on the podcast with you, Becky, is that I think that Donald Trump makes it more difficult for Republicans to win in Minnesota. I don't think he's a net positive to Republicans in this state. And just thinking about this state, he's a problem. There's a pretty clear, I think, consistent track record also in just looking at his electoral success. He was not a net positive to Republicans keeping control of the Senate, keeping control of the House, and other types of things. I understand Representative Fenton's kind of process arguments, but my emotional kind of reaction and where I'd like the party to be is much more in line with what Andy said. And I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to have him on, and we wanted to have him on, is because I just honestly just identify with his comments. I understand it from both perspectives, and we're trying to have kind of a in the family kind of conversation about this and not be too critical. But I just wanted to give some attention to Andy's op-ed and his commentary, because I think it's where a lot of I think long term, that's where the party needs to be and where it needs to go is stepping away from Trump. And it's something that there's not a lot of Republicans out there, particularly in this timing of the process, that have the kind of, for lack of a better phrase, kind of backbone and institutional fortitude to stand up like that. And I really wanted to give some attention to Andy's commentary, because on a number of issues, he's been very thoughtful, he's conservative, good conservative, but very thoughtful and articulate, and wanted to give some attention to it. And it's a good jumping off point for a broader discussion today.
And we're going to come back to the congressional endorsement here, but I do want to, as a few of you have mentioned, Trump's impact on the party as a whole. I do want to kind of jump into that and why that's impactful on this, why they chose to endorse Donald Trump. Andy, in your op-ed, you kind of imply that supporting Donald Trump is essentially almost anti-Republican, and something that I it's been a long frustration of mine. In there you say, quote, "I thought being a conservative meant fighting for the Constitution. Trump supports suspending it. I was under
And
the
he does.
impression we are a party in support of traditional family values. The Donald has long scoffed at them." Why is it that Republican MAGA voters, why doesn't this kind of thing seem to resonate with them? I mean, I feel like here in the state of Minnesota, we've seen even Michelle Bachmann wasn't passing the purity test anymore, right? We've seen this long held up, holding our members to a very high standard of what it means to be a Republican under the party platform, under the Constitution. And that's not something that Donald Trump necessarily fits under. Andy, speak a little bit to that and why you feel that way.
Well, I certainly can understand Donald Trump's appeal in 2016. He was an outsider. He had, he was hilarious. People had high hopes that he would be something different. So I can understand that. Listen, he came into office and was able to accomplish some positive things that I give him credit for. But as far as I'm concerned, his behavior after the election of 2020 renders him unfit to be dog catcher. And what is his appeal now? I don't know. I know people are angry, and I'm angry. And I think part of it is I think people had hoped that Joe Biden would be more of a unifying force. He hasn't. He has governed from the left. Tim Walz has governed from the left. The DFL has governed from the left. So a lot of people on the right are angry, and Donald Trump has been he's a very convenient vehicle for people to channel their anger. I wouldn't say he's a productive vehicle for that anger, though. Um, and to me, I struggle with what his appeal is, particularly given I don't think that he will be elected, and his candidates can't get elected. We saw that in 2022 with Scott Jensen. Just a colossal disaster. Um, and it, I struggle with that, but I think at the end of the day, people are very frustrated. I share that frustration, but I would like to exercise that frustration by winning an election, having some influence, and making some changes.
Andy, and I guess I'd start with you and to ask everyone, does Donald Trump running in Minnesota as the Republican nominee in 2024 help Republicans in this state, or is it a harmful?
Well, I think he hurts tremendously. I mean, I live in navy blue St. Paul, and a lot of my friends are Democrats, and I hear from them all the time how they think that the DFL is too far left, how they think the state has lurched too far left, how they want to see a healthy Republican Party again, how they actually would consider voting for a moderate Republican because they think things have gotten out of control here. But they won't touch Trump. And so we have a tremendous opportunity, I think, in this state. But Trump's dead on arrival with a lot of voters, myself included. And, this isn't Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, look at the stuff he says. Look at the stuff he puts out. I mean, it wasn't an exaggeration in my letter to the editor to say he calls for the suspension of the Constitution of the United States. He actually said that and meant it. And if he could
Correct.
have gotten away with it, he would have done it. I mean, these aren't exaggerations. That is very serious stuff. Um, so, it's a real shame because what we have here in Minnesota is a fairly center-right state, and yet we are blue, 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 and left, left, left because there is no Republican opposition because the Republican Party is a Trump party, and nobody but the reddest of red are getting on board with that.
Kelly?
I agree with Andy. I don't see a path to winning. We need to win the House back here in the state legislature. I don't see a path to victory if Trump is on the top of the ticket. Especially, we have to, in order to do it, we need the suburbs. And I could tell you from having just, run an election in 2020, the suburbs are not coming back if Trump is at the top of the ticket. I think it won't hurt those in the rural communities that are deep, deep red, like down in 1, 6, 7, and 8. But we can't win the House back in just those areas. We need the suburbs, and we all lost. I lost in Trump's midterm, and I get that, and I knew it was coming. I felt it at the doors. I heard it at the doors. For a long time, Minnesotans, when they would vote, would separate the individual from the top of the ticket. They do not do that in Minnesota right now with Trump. And it happened in 2018 and for me in 2022 when I ran the election. So there's not a path to victory if Trump is at the top of the ticket. And I agree with you, Michael. I think it's going to be Trump, unfortunately.
I absolutely agree. I think it is really tough for the suburbs, and in particular, again, as sound like a broken record here, but suburban women, I think, are going to have a really hard time because of the ties that this makes everybody in the Republican Party have to Donald Trump. And I think it is really hard for those folks like Andy talks about that would maybe consider voting for a Republican, whether, that's at the state level, the legislative level, or congressional level, but are so just turned off by the Trump ties and by these comments. And then if there's rallies or whatever, it's going to happen and, things are going to come through. People are going to be dropping Trump lit with state legislator lit, and it's just going to be a tie. to Donald Trump, whether you want it or not, being on the right side of the ballot. So I think it is going to be a strain down ballot. Unfortunately, it's going to be. We've talked long about how it is a fine line for Republicans to vote or to walk, and I think it's going to be tough to have each individual candidate figure out how they're going to navigate that. Because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's going to be people that, if you don't support Donald Trump, are also on the Republican side, not going to come out and vote for you or support you or work for you on the campaign trail because you are not backing the former president. So it's a really tough place to be. I really wish we were over the Donald Trump era, and it is really frustrating.
I think what I would say to voters who support Trump, I don't want to lecture anybody. And if you've got a strategy that works, that's great. I didn't think Trump could win in 2016. He did. Prove me wrong. I'm wrong all the time. But look at how that's working today. I mean, if you're somebody that's conservative like I am and you care about issues, how are we doing today? I mean, if you care about life issues, I care a lot about life issues. Right now in Minnesota, you can get an abortion up until birth, no problem. There is absolutely no regulation at all. I mean, the pro-life movement is in the worst spot it's ever been in the history of the state. Thanks. And, we had a very pro-life gubernatorial candidate, but that didn't do a whole lot of good because he didn't get elected. So that's where the Trump brand has gotten us. It just simply isn't working. The results are unbelievably disastrous. So I would just humbly ask people that are angry and kind of feel like, if I support Trump, I'm really going to show them. Well, the Democrats love it. I'm sure Ken Martin and the DFL are thrilled to see us, renominating Trump. I mean, Biden is a disaster. I mean, it's just amazing that we can't get our act together and nominate someone like Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis that would easily win. So it's very frustrating, but I would just submit to folks to just look at the results. And at least for me, when something's not working in my life or something's not working, I like to make changes. And as Republicans, how in the world can we not make changes based on the results we've been getting in Minnesota?
I want to go into the decision, like you mentioned, of endorsing Trump over someone like Nikki Haley and what kind of goes into that. You both have been involved in different aspects of politics, working for members, working for the party, being a member yourself. So what do you think went into that decision making here? Was there a decision to be made? Was it just if we have to endorse Trump, it's a matter of when we come out and do that? Do you think there was any conversation of like, hey, I really like Nikki Haley, she would be a great option? Do you think these members had any shot of potentially endorsing somebody else, or was it gotta go Donald Trump, just as a matter of when you put out that announcement? Michael, let's start with you on this one. I'm interested to hear where you stand.
Well, I've been pretty clear from the beginning that is, I didn't want it to be Trump. I had a feeling that it was going to be, and I was hoping for there to be an opportunity for another candidate. That has just not materialized. Donald Trump has played this out in a masterful way, and there's been these debates, and we have a combination of the varsity team and the JV team, and there hasn't been a candidate that's broken out. And I don't think there was much option. I don't think there was much political option. I think that the Trump operation is just difficult for me to comprehend. I understand kind of the both views. I really understand Representative Fenton's perspective that this was kind of process and this needed to happen. I think if you're looking at the polls, if you're looking at the numbers, it's clearly Trump is leading for the nomination. It's really not close. And so you can argue from a numbers standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, that the numbers justify the endorsement, that he's clearly in a strong position, and this makes sense from a numbers standpoint. But my heart is exactly where Andy Brehm is, and my mind is exactly where Andy Brehm is, which is that it's just not a good long-term move, and it doesn't make sense. And so that's the struggle that I have, is that I understand on paper why they went this route, but my heart and mind is just not there. I just think long-term, that's what we're going to wrestle with, and that's what I think we're discussing. It seems a bit, to be very candid with you, it seems like we've all seen this movie before. All four of us are, and I just may, if we're doing this, and I think we will be, if we can be available on election day in 2024, I think we would very likely come back to this audio and say, we knew this crash was going to happen. And the advantage I think that people like all of us have, but particularly Andy in this particular instance, is he's memorialized his concerns in letter, and he can go back and he's staked out that claim and we can discuss it. But I feel like this is a slow moving car. And it's about to, like, we're in a car crash here, a slow moving car crash, and we can all see it coming. We know it's going to happen, but we can't get anyone to make any better decisions. And that's what I'm kind of frustrated about right now, is we just can't seem to be any difference, because in my heart of hearts and in my mind, I think Andy Brehm is spot on with the letter that he wrote. And I think it's the truth of it. But the political reality is that he's winning the nomination and he's in the lead. And so I understand the process stuff. So that was a long answer, but I defer to the guest to straighten it out.
Well, and Andy, you had mentioned you kind of wish that whether it was these members or others, there was more of a backbone from some Republicans in leadership or Republican vocal, prominent Republicans. Do you think there would be an opportunity or space for any of these members or other members of the delegation to start building up those endorsements for somebody like Nikki Haley? Would that help move the needle and potentially tip the scales?
Oh, I think it would have made a huge difference. I guess one thing I would disagree with Kelly on is I think, the role of elected officials in part is to shape opinion, right? I mean, activists and constituents are looking to them for guidance and for their wisdom. And when you have someone as substantial as Tom Emmer endorse Donald Trump for a second term, it gives him a sense of legitimacy. It helps calm some concerns that the guy isn't batshit nuts. I have a lot of respect for Tom, so his endorsement means something to me. And I just, again, I have a lot of respect for all four members of the Republican delegation. It truly surprised me, in all honesty. And politics aside from it, I'm really surprised that they honestly think that Donald Trump is fit to be president of the United States. I mean, he is so unhinged at the moment. He's clearly crazier than he was before. And a second term, he won't have the adults in the room that he had the first time around, or the threat of a reelection campaign, which apparently is kind of what kept him somewhat stable. I was really surprised. So I think it, like I said, I think it gives a lot of legitimacy to him. And I was very disappointed. I think, Minnesota's a competitive state, to be sure. Marco Rubio won the caucuses in 2016. I was a Rubio supporter. I was very proud of that. And so I think it was bad all around.
Representative, what's your thoughts?
A couple of things here, but there's some other things I think going on as well. And Andy, I don't disagree with many things that you've said. And I think the same thing about the many members and leadership on the Democrat side getting behind Biden as well. I can't believe that people have come out and just supported him, similar, right? But another thing, I wonder, these are congressional members. So their districts were very solid red and solid Trump. If they were U.S. senators, I'd say, do not come, don't make an endorsement. You got to stay neutral, stay out of it. But they very much came out in support. Why, I don't know. But there's a few things. Tom Emmer did buck Trump. And Andy, you said Trump's candidates are not winning. And that's right. But in the primary, his endorsed candidates are winning the primary. They're not winning the general election. I kind of wonder I think Michelle Fischbach had a primary opponent last time. And I wonder if they're working in unison. Leadership kind of came and said, hey, let's do what you can to prevent from having to defend you in a primary. Let's put our money, there's a lot of things that go into these decisions. like I said, I don't necessarily like it. I stayed out of I got invited when I was at the legislature to go meet the plane, whatnot, when Trump or Pence, and I never accepted the invitation. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from as well. But I just think there's a lot more. The other thing is some of these, I think three of the four actually worked with Trump. I mean, they served under Trump. So, sometimes personal relationships trump actual politics. Who knows? But I do think there's a lot behind the scenes. And again, I'm not supporting Trump. And I would have preferred, people stay out of it. But for whatever reason, they did come out, but they came out as a group. There's power in numbers too. So we'll see what happens come election day 2024. And we'll know a lot in the next few weeks. We've got Iowa caucus. That's going to tell us a lot. Then after that, I think it's New Hampshire. So, by March 5th, it may be pretty clear who the person on the ballot's going to be. I'm really hoping that another candidate can emerge, like Nikki Haley coming out of Iowa or New Hampshire. We'll see what happens.
Becky, did you answer?
No, I think you guys put it very well. I don't think I have anything really to add on this subject. I'll turn it back to you to do your follow up, and I got some other comments following that.
Andy, one thing I have to say, and if this podcast, this discussion was generated by your letter. One thing I've known about you over the years, and we've spoken many times, is you're not prone to hyperbole and reckless kind of commentary. This was a very sobering letter to the editor that you wrote, and you used a lot of strong language to describe it, but all of it is precisely accurate. It's completely accurate. And one of the things you discuss is that he's going to retaliate, that he's going to come after people, that he's talked about retribution, that he's out there and said, "I am your retribution." He's going to come back people. There is one question I do want to ask, is that did these four members have a choice? Because as Andy articulates in his letter, and we're of course going to link to this, Donald Trump is keeping a list and checking it twice, and he's going to remember who was naughty and nice. And so this process right now, the nomination process, seems to be incredibly there's a lot of emotion in it, as there is in all political races. But what seems to be driving a lot of it is that we have the front runner for the nomination right now is really fired up and is talking in language about remembering who was with him and who was against him, and coming in and using that kind of strong language. Did these members have a choice to not support him?
Well, I think you always have a choice when you're in elected office whether to do the right thing or the expedient thing. I mean, those are choices that politicians face every day. I'm not in an elected office, so I don't face those choices. We have seen where going along with Donald Trump gets most people. Look at Rudy Giuliani. I mean, he has been very loyal to Donald Trump, and that has not served him very well. So I guess I would argue with anyone that feels like their well-being is tied with fealty to Trump. How is that working out for a lot of the people that have done that? At the end of the day, I guess I will take these four members of Congress at their word that they truly believe that he should be the next president of the United States. But I would take issue with that. But no one is hostage. We have choices, and these are leaders in our party and leaders in the United States Congress. And I think it would have been very powerful for them to at least have stayed out of it and let the people of Minnesota make a decision. So, I guess I don't, unless people stand up to this stuff. I don't think Donald Trump, he'll be the bully everyone makes him out to be.
I have one of my frustrations always with working in politics over the last decade is the politics of politics, right? There's always the politics of politics is pretty hardcore and it's substantial. And I think that is certainly something that came into play here. Kelly, as you mentioned earlier, Steve Scalise also endorsed Donald Trump this week, and that follows endorsements by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik. And but with Scalise and Emmer, obviously it has a little bit of a different angle. So Trump snubbed both of them in their speaker races. He had some choice words to say about Emmer during his speaker's race, called him out of touch, and may have played a role in that speakership contest ending there for Congressman Emmer. So it is a little that is a little surprising to me. I do think there is something to be said. We have seen, like you mentioned, Representative, primary opponents for some of these members. I worked for Congressman Emmer for a number of years. We saw one, nothing credible, nothing substantial, but there were challengers, and that is something, as you mentioned, Andy, as well, about the retribution that this former president prides himself on. It seems is something that I could see being a target or an arrow at these members' targets should they have gone against him. But one thing I do want to ask is, because of the leadership now that has all come out in support of former President Donald Trump and his reelection bid here, we obviously aren't on the inside. We don't know these details. Do you think it's conceivable or likely that these members, the Republican leadership in Congress coming out and endorsing President Donald Trump, do you think that there was potentially a deal struck saying, hey, we're going to endorse you, stay out of House races, don't do any more primary opponents, stay out of this, we're going to focus on the House, we'll endorse you so you can go do your thing, we're going to do our thing? Any thoughts on that? Or am I black helicoptering it?
Well, I'll go as one who served, but I do think that that's very it's always possible. There seem to be, politics is filled with ulterior motives, right? So I think anything is possible, especially, you mentioned something that I was going to say, and I forgot the fact that Emmer could possibly have been the Speaker of Congress had Donald Trump not interfered with that. And yet here he's coming out and standing with them. So I do find that interesting, but it's also, has there been a promise of significant money coming into these districts? I have no idea, but I think we'll see down the road.
Andy, if a deal like that was struck, do you think that it is a good move to at least hopefully protect the congressional races in our quest to maintain the majority?
Well, I wouldn't. Donald Trump is not a man of his word, and he's not someone to be trusted. So I wouldn't do a deal with him. I think most people that have tried that have come out of the losing end. If that were the case, I wish him well with that deal, but I doubt, Donald Trump's ego is so big, I doubt he can stay out of anything where his input is desired. I just think there seems to be a consensus amongst the establishment and the Republican Party that people need to coalesce around Donald Trump this early. I totally disagree with that. I don't know where that comes from, but I just think that's what this is all about, and our representatives are going along with it, and I'm disappointed by it, because I do think it has a powerful impact. I do think it has a silencing effect, for sure, and it puts a certain inevitability on something that I've been trying hard to remind people that we are still very early in this, and we have had situations where things have changed very quickly. And that's what primaries are all about. But anyway.
If I may, is there not a possibility that also that this was, if we are early in the process, which I agree that this could change, this was a safe choice for them from the standpoint of it creates the least amount of animosity because he is in the lead, he is the front runner, and they're at least from, if as Becky articulated, the politics of politics, is at least from that perspective a safe move on their part, just to at least they're in essence, if the politics of the politics, they are endorsing the front runner. They are endorsing the person who is leading in the polls in the Republican nomination. we all understand what happens in the general election. But could we maybe see an argument where this was a safe political move from that standpoint, if we're looking at through the lens smartly of Becky's lens of politics, that they in
Yeah, I
essence
think.
endorsed the front runner?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think endorsing the front runner is easy and it's tempting. And listen, I mean, Donald Trump supporters are. Um, they are a energetic group of people, and if you have them on your team, that is a force to have on your team. I will tell you, when I've written things like this, the messages that I get, I won't repeat them on this show. I mean, I've been fighting for conservative values in the state for 20 some years, and the horrible things that people say to me, and the vitriol that you get is unbelievable. So there's just a lot of passion for the former president that I suppose, if you're able to marshal for your own self-interest, can be quite a powerful force. It's a pretty ugly force in my view, having seen some of it. But I can see the temptation to have some of that on your side. And listen, I like all these guys a lot, and so it really just does. It is hard. It really is hard to understand. But I think, Michael, you're right. I think somewhere along the line, folks consider this a safe bet or a smart bet, and they've placed it.
I'm interested also to hear from you guys about your thoughts on the delegation doing it en bloc, that doing this together, coming forward, endorsing on the same day. Michael, I'll start with you, kind of to marry the last two questions, both the politics of a potential deal of some sort within leadership, but also within the delegation as a whole. Do you think there are some large grandiose plans of why and when Emmer, Fishbach, Finstead, and Stauber came out to do this the same week as Scalise after leadership? What are your thoughts?
Well, let's piggyback for a second on what Andy just said, which we know exists. There is a element of Trump supporters that are very passionate, and one of the advantages of all four of them doing it at the same time is there's a little bit of safety in numbers. Number one. Number two, let's say that two of them did that. The other one or the other two members that hadn't would be on the receiving end of this kind of punitive kind of squad that comes after them. Again, retribution. They're punitive. There's a real energy, and I agree with Andy's adjectives that he described it. It can be somewhat very ugly sometimes and somewhat mean-spirited. And so if the advantage of all four of them jumping together is there's a little bit of safety in numbers, but also you're also protecting then the ones that maybe were hesitant, because I don't know in this political environment let's be clear. It's you're asking for, you need to have some broad shoulders. If you're going to be one of three or two of four, one of four or two of four, or one person that stands against the rest of your Republican delegation. We've seen in other states how that plays out, and in other political circumstances, the pressure that comes under that. And so I think if they were going to do this, if we all collectively do respect those four members, and I know we all do, this was the better way to do it, because what have happened is that whatever member didn't, there would have been a lot of political pressure assigned to them. It would have gotten ugly, and it would have led to a political dynamic that I think is a part of all of Donald Trump's calculations, which is retribution and in some ways punishment, and that would have been unfortunate. Kelly or Andy, your perspective.
I'll chime in. I mean, I agree. I think there was safety in numbers. And, again, back to decisions. One thing, because again, I do agree with a lot of what Andy's saying, and I think that there's one important point he made, and I agree with it, because I wish we could get back to that. But so many decisions today within politics are made on retaining the office. And I wish that we could get back to across this country in terms of standing on principle, and that being more important than retaining the office. And that doesn't always happen. But there's safety in numbers. I think there were strategic decisions made in the timing of everything, from leadership coming out in support of Donald Trump as well as our delegation.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I don't think none of these members have any issue in terms of being safe. They will be reelected. So I don't think their political careers in any way are in jeopardy. And I think Kelly put it well earlier. I think at the end of the day, they probably felt they were being representative of the political establishment in their districts, which are very pro-Trump, and I can see going along with that. But like I've said repeatedly, it's unfortunate because it has tremendously negative political consequences for the rest of the state.
My last question here before we wrap up is Representative, about a tweet that you had sent regarding this endorsement. You said, "I'm not going to say this as one who isn't on the Trump train. This is what it looks like when you are in tune with your district. Go look at the Trump results from their districts. I've always said you need to legislate from your district, and some might not like your stance." Now, you were a former legislator, candidate, have spent a lot of time knocking doors, talking to constituents. Will you explain a little bit to our listeners about how you weigh those decisions when serving your constituents of what you want versus what they want and versus what you believe, especially when it comes to this MAGA type Republican that we do have? And real quick before I throw it to you, I just want to say, I spent a number of years at the state party as executive director, well within the grassroots activist space, and that MAGA, Republican is really, really ingrained in there. And so I do find it hard to, again, balance that. So, what were you hearing at the doors and that maybe with this MAGA Republican and why they did this, even if they maybe don't have that same personal stance and big, gusto support for President Donald Trump?
So, it was really interesting because in 2016, I mean, I was like Andy, I would have placed my life on the fact that no way would Donald Trump ever get elected, and he did. 2018, boy, I was getting yelled at the door and by even Republicans, leaving the party. I sat out 2020 and ran again in 2022. And it's interesting, had a lot of great conversations at the door, but never really heard much about Trump until our candidates at the top of the ticket proudly embraced his endorsement. And suddenly that came up again at the door. And the people in my district assumed that because I was Republican, that I was exactly like Donald Trump, that I must have been exactly like him. And when I served, I did my best in Woodbury to represent everybody, including those who did not vote for me. I was probably attacked more in my tenure at the House by my own Republicans for not standing, holding true to the platform or whatever, of the party, right? I was attacked more by my own Republicans, but I took that as a measure that I must have been doing well because I was representing everybody. And I got elected 2 times by winning every single precinct in my district. So, but then losing almost every precinct narrowly when in Trump's midterm. So the big question is, I think that we need to have going forward too, is like, how do Republicans separate themselves from Trump? Because right now in the suburbs, people truly believe that because I'm Republican, I must be just like him and as evil as they see him, right? So I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the measures being taking Trump off the ballot because I think one of the ways we can the Republicans can rid themselves is to have him voted out in every state or whatnot by Republicans. He needs to be voted out. And unfortunately, it's not going to happen in every state. We'll see. But we need to figure out a way going forward, if Trump's on the ballot too, how can those running again separate themselves from the person at the top of the ticket?
Yeah, I would just add, listen, I'm a fan of change, and parties change, brands change, and I don't necessarily have this knee-jerk reaction to the MAGA movement. I mean, in 2016, the party changed, and in some ways, that was a good thing. We saw a whole new swath of people brought into the Republican Party. Minority participation in the Republican Party increased. I mean, Donald Trump did some positive things for the party that are good, and I'm not denying that. Um, but the guy's unhinged. And so we need to accept that and recognize that there's a lot of people who simply won't vote for someone or a party that's led by someone who's nuts. And that's just going to be a problem. Everything that movement fights for, Kelly and I agree with as well. But we just need to get united behind competent, relatively attractive people. I mean, if I was hiring someone for a job and they had a good resume, but they were clinically insane, I probably wouldn't hire them. And it's the same in politics. They may have the right views and say the right things and get me fired up like Donald Trump does, but I'm not going to hire somebody for president of the United States who's unbalanced. And so, the brand of our party has become crazy, and I recognize that makes some people excited, and that it's fun for some people. But those of us in Minnesota have to live in the consequences of that. This has become a completely liberal cesspool. I mean, our cities are in utter decline. The state is losing population. I mean, it's real. It's not a game. And, particularly if you live in the cities, we're really experiencing what DFL dominance looks like, and what Republican Party dominated by Trumpism, what this looks like. It's really serious stuff. And so I recognize people are mad and angry, but I am too. Let's express that anger by winning elections, and we are never going to do that with Donald Trump, and we've learned that now after multiple election cycles. If I was wrong, great, and I was wrong in 2016, but I've been right in every election since.
Michael.
I'm going to defer to my co-host to carry us off, but I wanted to say before we go how much I've enjoyed this discussion. Representative Fenton, you've been on before, and Andy, which we appreciate you coming back for a second opportunity. And Andy, this is the first opportunity we've had to speak with you, and we hope to have you on again. I think there's a lot that I learned from this discussion, and one of the things that we're trying to do is to have more of these larger discussions, and this was a great launching off point. And Andy, was a great op-ed, a great letter to the editor you wrote that served as the genesis for this discussion. So I want to thank all of our participants, and also just welcome Andy for coming on today, along with Representative Fenton, of course, and Becky for hosting. But thank you for being a part of the discussion today. It was meaningful, it was substantive. I think this is going to be a great episode for people to listen to. Becky.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for lining it up, Michael. Great guest. Real quick before I close up, Andy, where can people find you, follow you for future comments, thoughts on this and other items?
Well, I don't do politics for a living, so I am on Twitter at @andybrehm.com or @andybrehm, but that is about it. So those opinions are mine alone.
Perfect. And Representative Fenton, where can folks follow you on social media or elsewhere?
They can find me on Twitter at Kelly Fenton MN, and Instagram, I'm also Kelly Fenton MN as well. But for politics, you'll want to follow me on Twitter.
Perfect. Well, like Michael said, these kind of discussions I always have been some of my favorite episodes. I think it's really great to hear from folks, different backgrounds, different positions, different thoughts on things, and especially things like this type of endorsement where you do need to weigh the political ramifications and how it, means for their personal race and up and down ballot. And I think there's so much at stake here. And, as this came out, I was torn myself because, if I was working for any of these members, I would be advocating for them to, endorse the president, even though that's not personally what I feel. So I get the move, I get the play. There's a lot more to it when it comes to Donald Trump over any other Republican nominee we've seen over the last however many years. And so this is certainly not going to be a conversation that goes away, as Donald Trump's implications on Minnesota politics, our candidates, and future hopeful Republican majorities at some point in the near future hang in the balance. So thank you all for participating, and we hope to chat again soon.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Becky, we spoke with Andy Brehm and Kelly Fenton about the Republican members of the congressional delegation endorsing Donald Trump. Your take on the discussion?
I mean, I thought it was great. I always, think that it's so interesting to have 4 people on that have, been around the game, similar kind of backgrounds at times, but having so many different ways to look at a situation here. So I liked being able to hear from Andy and his disappointment and frustration. And I totally get it, right? I think it totally makes sense when you and I are not Trump folks. I also don't want Trump to be the nominee. But if I think about all of this politically, if I was working for any of these members, I would be telling them to do the same thing. From my mind, there wasn't really a choice. These members, it was more of a matter of when they endorsed Trump than if they did.
Correct. And I think that's the balance, and not to play Switzerland, but I think both Fenton and Brehm first of all, we're making great points, and compliments to Andy Brehm for his letter to the editor. It was a great discussion point. It was a great launching off point. And Andy is, as I said during the podcast, he's not prone, in our interview with him, he's not prone with hyperbole. He's pretty even keeled. He's taken some swings at me on social media. He's one to scrap at, throw some elbows, but it was very responsible, and a very responsible messenger of a very frustrating message. And so my compliments to him for drafting it and speaking out, but I understand his frustration. But I also agree with a lot of what Fenton said. I mean, I think that, I think of all the people, I think you summed it up the best with it's the politics of politics. And that's the lens by which we're looking at this stuff. And that really framed up my thinking about it. While I understand Andy's and Andy's frustration resonates with me, and I understand Fenton's perspective, I think the way that you kind of tied a good bow on it and broke it down of the politics of politics is the way I'm going to think about it. And it provides, I think, just the right kind of messaging and bracketing by how the decision should be looked at. I don't think that they could ignore the realities. And, I think we both laid out the pros and cons, but the politics of politics is the way I'm going to look at it. And it's going to be a good discussion going forward.
And the politics of politics is something that I've always talked about, because it's something that, is, as a former political staffer, is something that's so enticing and intriguing and like alluring, to this world, because there is so many different chess moves that you can do and all of that kind of thing. It's also kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to tap out of it, because it is something that gets a little old at times when you want to have a more rose-colored glasses on when you look at our government and political system, and it is a little gets a little disillusioned after a while. But with the Trump endorsement as a whole, I think it's one of those things that it's kind of our goals and hopes for Trump is kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Are we going to topple Trump because people start not endorsing him and building up behind somebody like a Nikki Haley? Or do we need Trump to fail? I mean, it's just, it's so hard to look at it and know what the right move is. And if you can effect change by endorsing somebody else, or if that is going to make you not be reelected to Congress, and then what good are you because you are no longer serving? So it's a tough place to be for these members, for sure. For the 4 members in Minnesota, I think it makes sense. I think the delegates and activists and base in their districts, it makes sense. And so, yeah, I get it.
We'll see. This is going to be an interesting year because there's a lot going on in the race on the Republican side for president. We'll see about what happens on the Democratic side, but we're going to try to cover it as best we can. And as you and I are both, neither of us are strong. Neither of us are Trump supporters. So it's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but I think we'll carve out a path and be able to provide some balanced perspective, insight, and break this stuff down. Speaking of just a lot of good content, I just Speaking of just content, I think it's good. What are we going to talk about next, Becky?
Are you ready for some football?
Yes, I am. Today I am.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell the listeners where we're at today?
We are sitting, I mean, technically there's a game tonight, right? But you are
there's
sitting.
not.
Is there not?
No, I don't
Oh
know.
wow,
There's-
that goes to what I know right now. You are sitting in first place pretty comfortably by a few points. 10 points over me sitting in third place. It's a sad day.
It's over. I mean,
It's over.
I mean, it's not a comfort. The season's over with.
Right. True.
I mean, I won by 4 games.
By a comfortable margin. There you go.
Comfortable margin. I finished, and again, just to repeat to our listeners, what were my personal goals for the league this year?
To beat me, and you
Yes.
did it. I'm so proud of you. I hope
Thank
you put that trophy on your mantle. And
We're gonna get one.
okay,
We're gonna get one, and so I feel very good about it, and it was a lot of fun. A couple of things just to preface, and we've had some discussion about this. I don't know if we'll put an asterisk. I think
oh, you won. I get it.
Twitter /X has done a good job. We've papered the file correctly. That there were some kind of administrative snafus at the beginning, but I think there's plenty of an opportunity for people to come back. But we'll do this next year. We'll make sure that people have to submit for all the games. There was some confusion. Dan Minnesota, who was contributed in the league, he's noted a number of times that there were some administrative hurdles. He did finish in a distant 6th, and I believe without any hesitation that his distance in 6th was because of some of those administrative snafus. I think you're just terrible at fantasy football.
Okay.
I think if anything, you were aided by that, and maybe some people provided some insight maybe they provided you some insight in your DMs or something where you got some tips and suggestions. I don't know. I can't
No.
say that. What I do want to just ask you for a couple things is I want to run a few things by you.
All right.
As you know, I'm not very good at fantasy football, even though I won this season. I am good at trash talking. And so I just want to run a couple of these by you to see what your take is. So these are some sample tweets that I have drafted for just some trash talking this week. Just crowned the champ of our fantasy football league. Guess who's dominating both politics and fantasy sports in Minnesota? That's right, me. Looks like my skills in fantasy football are as sharp as my political insight. Finished first in our league. To my fellow podcasters, better luck next time. I think that would be you.
Yeah, that's rough.
Who just crushed the fantasy football league? This co-star. When I'm not dissecting politics, I'm busy winning championships. Seems like I'm unbeatable in more than just debates. Ooh.
Wow.
And one more. Just a quick shout out to myself for dominating our fantasy football league. It's not just political opinions. It's not just my political opinions that are right on target. Can't wait to defend my title next year.
Wow. How much time do you spend on those?
An embarrassing amount of time. And by the way, I will tell you, and I'm just being polite because I don't want my trash talking to just really just break your spirit. I have 2 pages of those.
Oh,
two
wow.
pages of those with a fair amount of effort put into both emojis and hashtags. And so I think it's going to be a good week.
I can't wait.
Well, Becky, I want to thank you for participating in our fantasy league, and we're going to have some discussions about some segments now that we're going to start doing more in the podcast. But I want to thank you for participating in the league, and
Loved it.
And I'm looking forward to defending my title, and maybe we could figure out some co-management system for you and your team next year.
No, I got it. I
where
am
we
going to
can-
be spending my off season studying stats. Get excited.
That's good. Well, thank you for being such a good sport and for doing this once again.
You bet. Congratulations.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
We want to thank you for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can leave a review or give us a shout out on our website or across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you again for listening.